Hello and welcome to our training on commercial sexual exploitation of children, otherwise known as C.S.E.C. It is brought to you by our VMS Counseling Services, Building Successful Families. I'm Alex Torres and I will be your trainer for today's training.
Today's training goals include educating resource parents on the basis of C.S.E.C, including the different type of exploiters, recruitment techniques, and language used. Also, resource parents will learn what factors that place youth at risk of being trafficked and what signs to look for when a youth is involved in C.S.E.C. Resource parents will also learn strategies they can use to engage youth who are at risk or who have been victims of C.S.E.C. Lastly, resource parents will learn the basics of the trans-theoretical model of change and how that applies to victims of C.S.E.C.
A lot of people don't want to believe that human trafficking exists in the Central Valley.
It's bigger than what we thought it was.
It's modern-day slavery. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal industry in the world.
The criminals in the area of human trafficking are those individuals that have transported people across the borders or within the United States and have intended them to use them for profit.
A day in the life of a victim of human trafficking is solely to survive.
It's all over. On the outskirts, in the inner city, north, south, east, and west.
Right here in the Central Valley, and if there was one, there's more.
Chinese descent, Hispanic, South American descent, and then more often than not, it's just they're Americans also.
Human trafficking is driven by a profit motive.
A human being can be used over and over and over again, and that profit margin is wildly greater than the profit margin of drug trafficking.
The motives and things behind slavery in the past may have been different, but the effect it has on humans is the same.
Contact initially starts out as a friendship.
I was 11, and this woman came to my house.
The carrot's dangled. You can do these other things, and then they'll commit to that.
Most people say white people are rich, so I was like, okay. She said she was gonna I'm gonna have the time of my life. So we left that day and started on our journey to the United States in a school bus.
They're taken out of their safe place, and some controlling is now in effect.
They find out very quickly, all too quickly, that the promise is false.
The coercion starts into force and threats.
She told me I would get deported.
So there's lots of different tactics that traffickers use to control their victims.
Coercion, force.
It was to the point where I was scared for my life.
Fear, intimidation, abuse.
I saw all the welts and the bruises and the cuts on him.
Even an emotional bond between a victim and a trafficker. For example, a minor child who's emotionally bonded to a trafficker who then exploits her for commercial sex.
End up in a ditch somewhere, get raped and killed.
As a child, you're not able to protect yourself or know how to get yourself out of that situation. You're dependent on everybody.
The victims are mostly children and young adults.
I called the police and I called CPS.
They don't have the experiences in life that you and I do.
They didn't listen to me.
The system that's there to protect children, young people, had ignored her.
Called the Belizean consulate. I even called the deporting people, asking them, begging them to deport me because I have nowhere else to go.
She was threatened, she was beaten, and so she knew that she had no escape.
Nobody was listening. Nobody was helping me.
They don't know what to believe and what not to believe.
Our system had let this person down.
I was scared because
Nowadays, it's a profit business, a big profit business, billion-dollar profit business.
It's not going to go away, and it's only going to be harder to address it down the road.
Men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking. Trafficking is usually in one of two areas. It's either sexual exploitation or labor.
Forced on the street and prostitution.
Tied to a bed, burned with cigarettes until they were compliant to do the work that they were told to do.
Forced labor, involuntary servitude.
Living at the location. They're not allowed, they're encouraged not to leave. Food's brought to them.
Forced to care for 3 or 4 other children, even when the victim is 14 years old herself.
They work from 10 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the morning.
Working in a field under armed guard with the threat of being shot.
They're monitored by cameras.
Men could purchase them and rent them for sex for a few hours in a hotel room, over and over and over again, 10 to 12 times a day.
They've got nobody to turn to.
Certainly there are victims who are under armed guard or shackled or something like that in extreme cases, but there are other victims that do walk among us, all of us, but yet they're still prisoners in their own world. And actually, it's not their world, it's the trafficker's world. We all have to work together collaboratively to address the issue of human trafficking.
A coalition that will advocate for trafficking victims.
Locally, we have the Central Valley Freedom Coalition and also Central Valley Against Human Trafficking, which is a project sponsored by Fresno County EOC Sanctuary and Youth Services.
I've never seen at any point in my career the number of people that want to help out on this cause.
The initial solution to addressing human trafficking is building awareness. We have to understand the issue, and we have to be willing to accept that it exists before we can actually intervene.
I think people hear stories of people that are in trafficking situations, but they're not educated, so they don't even know it's trafficking.
Joe Blow just needs to look, put his head on a swivel, and be aware of his surroundings.
These people are victims. They're not the criminals, they're the victims.
Show some compassion to what you see, and don't be afraid to report it.
There's, remedies that the law makes available to those people.
Our hope is to intervene early, rescue these victims. More important for my job, and the goal out of my day, is to hold that person responsible, accountable for their crime, so they don't go on and victimize the next person. 2 young girls who were being forced into prostitution work on the street. They had been separated, and one escaped out of a house and ran down the street, contacted the first person they saw and said, "Call 911 for me." The officers got out there, they recognized what they had, they listened to this story, and they called. We were able to load her up, and she took us to the other person who was being treated the same way. We rescued her and arrested the offender who was controlling that person on the street. The relief you saw in their eyes when you pulled these people off the street and under the control of the person that was putting them in that position was like something I hadn't seen. It was like a person had been just released from captive and a horrible place in their life. They rejoiced, they hugged, and it's something that motivates you to look for the next one. We named our task force the Coalition Against Human Trafficking in the Fresno Police Department. And that is in partnership with 2 other non-governmental organizations, EOC and Marjorie Mason Center here.
Anybody is in a situation to do something about it, if they see it, they hear about it, take responsibility, report it. Don't just hide your head in the sand.
You may make acquaintance with somebody and you feel that something's wrong with them. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them if everything is okay. And if you hear something that still elevates that suspicion, please call.
As people become aware of human trafficking, they are more likely to report suspicious activities, something that doesn't seem quite right.
We follow up on leads and tips through a 24-hour hotline that we've established for human trafficking.
Once a person becomes aware of human trafficking, it's difficult to ignore it.
Are they able to talk about where they live and things that they do on the weekend, and talk to you about the enjoyments that you and I would normally have?
It takes all of us, even average citizens.
If you come across somebody and they feel that they have no freedoms, they don't do anything, they stay there, they live there, or there's somebody standing over them who's monitoring every piece of conversation that you're having with them and maybe controlling and answering questions for them, it's something to be aware of.
We also provide services and advocacy for victims of human trafficking. We work very closely with law enforcement, prosecutors, other social service providers, other government agencies.
And we will respond immediately with trained investigators to take the lead on that case and follow up on any available lead to rescue a victim and come to a resolution for it.
Her mom had told me if she came back to that house, she was going to kill me.
They're hidden. We don't know that they're slaves, whereas, in Civil War time, you knew who the slaves were.
And I called Rana back, and I told her she needs to come get me now. Because if she doesn't come get me now, I don't think I'll be living tomorrow. So come get me now. And she told me, just hold on, she'll be there. And her and an officer and another lady came, and they took me and my babies and some clothes. And I didn't feel safe until I got in that van and away from the house. And all I could do was just take deep breaths of relief, because I was like, you know what? I finally have somebody to listen to me. Somebody finally said, you know what? You do need help. Because all the officers that everybody I talked to never did anything. So it just felt, it's hard to explain how it felt when this woman just said, I'm coming to get you. And all I could think of is me and my babies are gonna be free. We're not gonna get beat no more. We're not gonna be starved anymore. We're not gonna be locked in a room anymore. I won't have to do anything I don't want to do anymore. All I could do, and my babies could do, was sleep. We were tired. We were hungry. When I saw that bed, and saw that room, and saw those cameras, knowing that this time she can't get me. This time she can't find me. So, me and my babies, we went to sleep. We had a warm supper that day. And all I did was just hold my babies and read them stories. And told them, all I could tell them was, they don't have to worry anymore.
Even if you just rescued one person, that's a lifetime impact you just made on somebody.
I can move forward. That's what life looks like to me. I'm moving forward now.
So this slide shows you a visualization of what human trafficking is. When we think human trafficking, it's not just the sex trafficking. We also are considering labor trafficking. And the growing global human trafficking industry is valued at $31 billion a year. It's the second fastest criminal industry. It's only second to drugs, which is not too far off at $32 billion a year. So you can understand that this is such a lucrative industry for many people all over the world. And when we think about human trafficking, why is it? Why is it that it's so lucrative? Well, you have low overhead, high profit. You can sell an individual over and over and over and over again versus a bag of cocaine or a bag of marijuana. Once you sell it, it's done. Versus a person, you can utilize them, you can trade them from another person as well. So that's why people make so much money out of this. If we look at here, it says 50,000 people a year are brought into the US from around the world illegally. So yes, we got to understand that people are brought here and being trafficked, not only sex trafficking, but also labor trafficking, but they're also recruiting from our own communities. Our kids in our backyard.
Understanding C.S.E.C.
Okay, so now let's talk about what is C.S.E.C. Commercial sexual exploitation manifests in different ways, such as brothels, sex trafficking, mail order brides, sex tourism, pornography, prostitution, stripping, lap dancing, and phone sex companies. The most common form of child commercial sexual exploitations are sex trafficking, child pornography, and child sex tourisms. Commercial sexual exploitation refers to crimes and activities involving the sexual abuse or exploitation of a child for the financial benefit of any person in exchange for anything of value, including monetary and non-monetary benefits, given or received by any person. Examples of crimes and acts that constitute C.S.E.C include child sex trafficking, child sex tourism, the commercial production of child pornography, and the online transmission of live video of child engaged in sexual activity in exchange for anything else. Where is C.S.E.C happening? This is happening all over the world. As you can see by the statistics, it's very serious in India and other countries such as Thailand, Eastern and Central Europe, Brazil, the Philippines, but also it's very prevalent in the United States. One of the youngest victims that the EOC has came across, it was as young as 12 years old. Let's look at some facts. Just by looking at the map on this slide, what do you notice? As you can see, the red spots are places that are more prevalent with C.S.E.C situations. As you can see, California, especially our area, seems to be very prevalent. Although slavery is commonly thought to be a thing of the past, human traffickers generate hundreds of billions of dollars in profit by trapping millions of people in horrific situations around the world. This includes here in the U.S. Traffickers use violence, threats, deception, debt bondage, and other manipulative tactics to force people to engage in commercial sex or to provide labor or services against their will. While more research is needed on the scope of human trafficking, below are a few statistics. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally. 81% of them are trapped in forced labor, 25% are children, and 75% are women and girls. More than 40,000 cases of human trafficking have been reported to the hotline in the last 10 years. The hotline annually receives multiple reports of human trafficking cases in each of the 50 states and D.C. In 2016, an estimated 1 out of 6 endangered runaways reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were likely child sex trafficking victims. Of those, 86% were in care of social services or foster care when they ran. There is no official estimate of the total number of human trafficking victims in the U.S., Polaris estimates that the total number of victims nationally reaches into the hundreds of thousands when estimates of both adult and minors and sex trafficking and labor trafficking are aggregated. The hotline receives an average of 90 calls a day. So why is it important to talk about C.S.E.C? Well, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 86% of these children that are likely sex trafficking victims were in the care of social services or foster care when they went missing. 86%. I want you to take some time and reflect on why is that? What happens? Why is it so easy for this specific population to be targeted or to fall into this cycle? Also, 1 in 6 of the 18,500 runaways reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2016 were likely sex trafficking victims as well. So who is involved? Commercial sexual exploitation involves 3 main roles. We have the buyer, the trafficker, also known as the pimp, and we have the victim. There's also the role of the facilitator. The facilitator is or are individuals or businesses that are complicit in or benefit from the commercial sex exploitation and sex trafficking of minors. Examples of facilitators include limousine and taxi drivers, hotel and motel operators, landlords, and advertisers. So, the exploiter, there are 2 primary factors that drive human trafficking: high profits and low risk. Here's an example of the exploiters. We have the gorilla pimp, the Romeo pimp, and the CEO pimp. Now, the gorilla pimp is someone who's very abusive and intimidates the victims with verbal, emotional, mental, and physical abuse, and also threatens either the victim or threatens, for example, to kill the victim's family if she leaves or tells anyone. The Romeo pimp is very interesting in the way that it knows the trigger points or what the victim needs. So it's very loving, very charming, very handsome, and pretty much tells the young girls what they want to hear. And the CEO pimp most of the time guarantees a business or career opportunity. Now let's discuss some recruitment techniques. So this is what the gorilla pimp uses. He will use lines such as, "Come and party with me. Don't tell anyone where we're going. If you don't do what I'll say, I post these naked or embarrassing pictures of you all over the internet," or other scare tactics that are very intimidating and threatening. The Romeo pimp will use lines such as, "I love you. Nobody else understands me like you. I'll give you everything you deserve. I can't live without you. Dream with me." The CEO pimp uses the lines of, "I'm an agent. You have what it takes to make it in the industry. Trust me. This is strictly business. I can make you rich." And even gives them forms like applications or things that emulate a process of applying for something. Other recruitment techniques include promise of material comforts, feigning romantic interest, creating mutual dependent relationships between exploiter and employee, using physical violence, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. There's also the grooming techniques, and this is where they target the victim. A groomer will identify some type of vulnerability within the intended victim. Children with less involved parents are more desirable, although all young people are potential victims. Now, going back to a few slides before on why 86% of the children involved in C.S.E.C are either children who are in foster care or have been involved in social services. Most of the times, we know that these children have vulnerabilities when it comes to their parents being involved in a healthy way. And we also know that these children, no matter how young or how old, they crave that validation from their parents. And unfortunately, because of different situations, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, or other unfortunate situations, the children don't have that. They also gain trust from the victim. The groomer gains the victim's trust by gathering information about the child, their needs, and how to fill them. They make the child feel understood and valued. According to recent data, sex trafficking is a billion-dollar industry. And for a lot of these exploiters, to ensure compliance and meet demand, they use different methods of control. One, of course, is violence, intimidation and fear, not only of the victim but of their family, threats, and really targeting their vulnerabilities, such as emotional and mental.
So the Polaris Project helped create this wheel to kind of show a little bit more in detail how the power and control is utilized in trafficking. So if you take a look at it, we have different areas under sex trafficking. It's coercion and threats. It's threats to harm victims or family, threatens to expose or shame victim, threatens to report to police or immigration. So if you have a child, or let's say an adolescent who is currently being coerced by an exploiter to perform sexual acts, they may take videos of these acts, they may take pictures of them and threaten them to expose them on social media, or on their Facebook page, or send them over to the families' homes or their friends. And so it's another way for them to be able to try to maintain control over the victim. Other ways we talked about was intimidation, so harms to other victims, children or pets, displays or uses weapons, destroys property, lies about police involvement in trafficking situation. So we think about it, if some traffickers could go even to the point of purchasing a pet for one of their victims and then hurting it as a way to intimidate this victim, showing this is what I'm willing to do. Sometimes if victims end up having children of their own, they may threaten to hurt their children as well. Emotional abuse, a lot of times with these victims, they break down their self-esteem, they break down their self-worth, and then they rebuild them up the way that they want to. And so what ends up happening is these victims become dependent on the exploiters for their self-worth. And so it's a combination of compliments and caring for them mixed in with humiliation, calling them names, playing mind games, making the victim feel guilty or blame them for situations, and convincing the victim that they're the only one that cares about them. So this is a process that the exploiters are very good at doing. They know how to manipulate these victims, and they know how to maintain control over them. Another way that they maintain control is through economic abuse, creating debt that can never be repaid, taking money that they've earned, prohibiting access to finances, limiting resources to small allowances. So the money that they're making from the sex acts that they're being forced to do isn't necessarily money that they get to keep. This money goes directly to the exploiter, and then the exploiter will divide it out however they feel necessary. So let's say that a girl makes about $500 a night, she'll probably only see $20 that night, because the exploiter is the one taking that and using it to pay for their hotel or pay for her clothing, pay for her nails. And so they don't want them to have enough money to be able to actually survive on their own without them. Using privilege, they treat victims like a servant. They use gender, age, or nationality to suggest superiority. They'll use certain victims to control others, hides or destroys important documents. Let's say you have a victim that's immigrated to the U.S. and maybe has their green card or a visa that they're on. The exploiter may hold that as ransom to get them to do what they need them to do. Isolation is another method for them to maintain control. They keep them isolated from family, they keep them isolated from their friends. They basically are the only ones that see them on a regular basis. They move the victims to different locations. So, for example, there's a track that a lot of exploiters will take victims on. They'll go from Fresno, they'll go to San Francisco, down to LA, back to Vegas, and they keep them moving so they don't establish any actual contact or relationships with other people. Denying, blaming, minimizing, ongoing physical abuse. These are all ways that traffickers and exploiters use to help to maintain control over their victims.
According to recent studies, the ages of the buyers range from 18 to 89. However, the median age is 42 years old. Many of these do happen to be Caucasian professional white men who actually are married as well. 8.4% are either teachers or school employees, 5.2% are first responders, and 1.2% are faith community leaders. A lot of these men are also purchased sex for the first time. Over half are married or have a partner that may felt intense pressure from other men or have felt intense pressure from other men to buy sex. And they're highly likely to use pornography on a regular basis. A lot of the times the reasons that they purchase sex is for convenience, male bonding, thrill and power, a distaste for the normal relationship with women, and the desire to carry out sex act that their partner has refused.
She was 4 years old the first time a man looked at her the way a man looks at his wife on their wedding day. Little girls are supposed to dream about being models and doctors and veterinarians. Instead, she fought sleep eyes wide with terror of another night greeted by her stepfather's shadow. He was a real monster in her bedroom, and Mom, she was too fragile, too selfish to accept the truth that her little girl's innocence had been stolen one night when her boyfriend decided she wasn't good enough anymore. And since the little girl never had a real father, she accepted his advances because he always promised her his touches were acceptable, because he loved her. When you don't know yourself and you don't love yourself, you will fall for anything that sounds like love and feels like love. She was a walking corpse, stained with the fingerprints of strangers. And all she wanted was to walk the earth without the heaviness, the weight of all the men who tore a piece of her and took it with them. She never made it to see her 18th birthday. This is for the pain, for the stains that bath water won't wash away, for the scars left on the hearts of the fatherless child. This is for the girls objectified instead of praised like queens. This is for the agony. Growing up without a father, but all you really want is love, and you don't understand love. So one day when some guy stops you in a train station or a street corner and tells you you're beautiful, you are quickly intrigued. You like the fact that someone notices you, and you will do anything to feel like he's everything, and he promises you everything, and the things he convinces you to do, they don't seem that bad if afterwards he shows you how much he loves you. Your morals are abandoned on that sidewalk where you turned your first trick. Your beauty is left in that hotel room where some stranger touched you like his girlfriend and then left the money on the nightstand. And every night you die again, compromising your worth for what your pimp calls love and security. The hustle, the street lights, the schemes, it never seems worth it, but you have the liquor to comfort your fears. And as long as your profits meet expectations, you will have what you always wanted your whole life. Love. Love that doesn't feel right, but it's all you think you're worth, so you take it every day. You sleep when the sun comes up, rise when the sun is down. Conceal the torment with makeup and stylish hairdos. Put on your best outfits. Something arousing because you have to make them happy. The men, the tricks, the pimps. This is for the pain. This is for America. In hopes that you will notice that 12-year-old girl who was forced to trade her lunchbox and sneakers for a Chanel purse and pumps. This is for the 16-year-old girl kidnapped by a gang of men on her way to school and held captive in a house right next door to you. This is for the 20-year-old girl who took her last beating today because she couldn't bring herself to let another man hold her down and violate her. We are all slaves for love, degrading ourselves for acceptance of a man that's the closest thing to a father figure we've ever known. We were once just girls with aspirations and a small piece of hope. Now who will notice us? Who will save America's daughters?
This next video features a poem written by a victim of sex trafficking. And if you listen to it, there's a theme that you can hear that most of these victims are looking for. It's what are they in search for? So keep watching the video, listen for that theme, and keep in mind how easy it is for our kids who have suffered trauma to fall into the hands of traffickers.
So let's refresh our memories on who are these victims. As mentioned before and in the previous video, a lot of these victims are vulnerable. Youth living in group homes are perfect targets, and children and youth who are involved in social services. Youth with history of sexual abuse, children with developmental disabilities, bullied youth, also the LGBTQ youth, all teens seeking attention in relationships, and 54% of these victims are under the age of 17. And overall, 95% of victims are female. However, in the inner cities, it's about 45%.
It was pretty rough growing up. My mom was addicted to meth when I was a kid. My mom ended up getting cancer, and she passed away in 2010. And I lived with my stepdad for the time being. It was one day I was at school, and my teacher had asked me what was going on with me. I just started crying, and I'm telling him, my dad's abusing me. My mom just passed away. He looks at me in my eyes and he's like, Jaden, I'm so sorry this is happening to you, but I'm gonna have to call CPS. I was in contact with one of my mom's family friends. After everything is all said and done, they get me to move to where she's at. And there's this one day I had came home from school and I was a little bit late, and she just got really angry, and it was so quickly. She's like, I don't want you here anymore, I'm gonna call your CPS worker. And I'm like, okay. And I walked out the door and that was that. I went to my school and I slept outside of my school for a few days. This girl had came up to me and approached me and said, if you need somewhere to stay, you can come stay with me and my boyfriend. So I was like, where else am I gonna go? I don't have anywhere else to go. And there was about 4 or 5 other girls living in the house with us. And she had told me, she's like, this is my boyfriend Joker and he's gonna take good care of you. Joker was very nice to me. He would take me out and we'd go to the movies, and he'd buy me clothes and he'd get my nails done. And it was one day, Joker came up to me and asked me, I'm sitting on the couch. He's like, we're gonna go out for a little bit. Do you wanna come out with us? I was like, sure. We pull up to this motel. It's me and this other girl, and we go into this motel. She meets up with this man and she's talking to this guy and they're exchanging some words and they're talking about sexual things. And I'm starting to catch on and things are starting to click in my head. And I'm like, that's why you were so nice to me. And I'm watching her as she takes her clothes off and she lays down for this guy and he has sex with her. And I'm looking at Joker and he's sitting there with this blank face as if it's something normal. After everything's finished and he pays her, Joker sits down and tells me, I'm not asking you to do what they do, but I'm asking you to sit in on every appointment that we go on. I don't want you living here just for free. And he's like, this will be your way of paying me back. And I did. For the next 3 months, I sat in on every appointment that every girl had. The first couple of times was really hard for me, but after a while, it was a thing that we did. You know, when you don't have anywhere else to go, you do what you have to do. We were going to this appointment, and Joker had took me and one of my closest friends at the time. We got into the room, and the dude's sitting on the bed, and he's looking at me the entire time. And I'm like, what are you looking at? And he's like, I want her. And I'm like, I'm not doing this. And he's really angry, and he's like, so you're telling me you're not gonna give me what I want? He goes in his pocket, and he pulls out a gun. I'm sitting there crying on the floor. He tells me that I'm gonna do this thing to him, and I'm like, I guess I am. I'm like, I'm about to. It probably was maybe 3 minutes later when Joker comes in and he tells us to get out. Joker comes back out into the car and he looks at me and he says, I hope you really didn't expect to live here and not do anything for us. I'm still crying because this man was holding a gun to my head not too long ago. And in my head, I'm going through all these different scenarios of how my life could play out. I'm playing back all these girls of what they said, you know, you're not gonna be able to do this sober. So I'm gonna be a drug addict just like my mother. I loved my mom, I really did. And I saw her struggles. And I saw the way that men treated my mom, and I told myself that that wasn't gonna be me. But I didn't have anywhere else to go. We get home and Joker goes back to his room and we're all sitting out and we're just talking about everything that had just happened. And we haven't heard from him in a while. He was quiet and he didn't come out. And so we go in there to check on him and he's basically, I'm pretty sure he overdosed because he's foaming at the mouth. I'm thinking it's fight or flight. So I left and I slept on the streets again for a couple days. And it was hard for me because I was constantly looking for somewhere to stay. I had a mentor of mine and she had asked me a couple times, she's like, why don't you come to church with me? So I go to this church and I meet this family. We probably met up like twice, in all honesty. It was only like a couple times that we saw each other. And they had told me that they were interested in adopting me, and it was a lot of disbelief because of all the things that I had went through. And they were like, you know, this isn't a temporary thing. You know, we're not asking you to be here, you know, for just a short period amount of time, but we want you to be here with us. You know, we love you. We want to take you into our family. And I was like, heck yeah. So I've been with them ever since.
The following is a video from an individual who experienced human trafficking herself, and it's her story. So please take a look, and you can get an idea of who are.
From the First Coast News Studios, this is On Point with your host, Shannon Ogden.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Crawford, filling in for Shannon today. Thank you so much for joining us for On Point. Over the next half hour, we're going to have a candid discussion about child sex abuse and human trafficking. Right now, in Florida, there are more than 40,000 registered sex offenders. Think about this. According to the C.D.C., approximately 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused before the age of 18, and 1 in 6 boys. Now, those are not just numbers. They represent real children. And our first guest today, Jerome Alam, is a survivor. He says he not only survived child sex abuse, but also human trafficking and child pornography. Jerome, thanks so much for coming in today, sharing your story. And I know it took you years and years to get to this point where you're able to talk about what happened to you as a child.
Thank you for having me, Heather. It's taken me over 30 years to actually be able to speak about this, and it's been one of the most difficult things I've done in my life. But I really feel as a survivor, I have to let other people know that it's safe to speak out, and it's safe to know that they can also get out of a bad situation if they're being trafficked or abused. And if they just speak out, they can find help and get freedom.
You were only about 5 years old when you began being trafficked.
Yes, I was 5 years old. I was unfortunately a child of a dysfunctional family where there was alcoholism, domestic violence, and child abuse. And in that environment, I was a child who longed for affection. I was desperate for someone to love me. And that's where these pedophiles and predators and traffickers come in and take advantage of that in children, this want and desire just to be accepted and loved.
So how did it happen? You were vulnerable. You had a dysfunctional home life.
Yes.
But how did you actually get into this situation? How did you become a victim of child human trafficking?
It's over a period of time. There's a process that pedophiles use called grooming. And that process is that they find a child who is from a dysfunctional setting, who is desperate for affection. They give them gifts. They take them out to sporting events. They give them the attention. And then over time, they work their way into their lives to the point where, they feel like they're really being loved for the first time. And then what happens is that they progressively begin to escalate the physical part of the relationship. And eventually they get to the point where, they begin to try to molest you. And once you're being molested, they've got you to a point where they psychologically blackmail you. They say, if you tell anybody, I'll just say you're lying. Or they'll say, if you tell anybody, I'll hurt your family. And so you become trapped in a situation, and as a child, you just shoulder all the guilt. You blame yourself for getting in a situation, and so you're basically trapped in silence by these predators.
Gosh, when I read some of the statistics about human trafficking, and they say some of the children who were forced into these rings, forced into modern-day slavery, forced to have sex 20 to sometimes 40 times a day. That's absolutely, as a mom, unimaginable to me that these innocent children are having to go through this ordeal. In your case, you were drugged?
Yes, we were drugged. In my case, we were given cocaine and alcohol and other types of drugs. And typically that makes the victims more pliable. And, and then you get to the point where you're so numb from just the physical abuse, the drugs, and the alcohol that you're just trapped in hopelessness and you can't see a way out.
When you were going through this nightmare, truly
yes.
a nightmare, from the outside, did you appear to be living a normal life? Were you going to school?
Oh, absolutely. So I was living a very normal life. I mean, I was a shell of a person, but I lived a very normal life. But, on the outside, when I wasn't in school, I was being put through a hell that no one should have to endure.
Were there any warning signs that anyone should have picked up on, should have noticed, so that these years and years of abuse might not have happened?
Absolutely so. I mean, when you see a child who has a lot of anxiety, has a lot of fear, who really just craves affection, is really physically ill a lot, because what happens is that under these circumstances, when you're being trafficked or being abused, I mean, it's a very difficult process, psychologically, physically, and emotionally. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of warning signs you can look for in children if you get the proper education and training.
I want to ask about who was buying your services, because sometimes, if you think about human trafficking, you might think about the person appearing to look like a human trafficker, a scum of the earth. But not so. No, absolutely not. I mean, we're talking about doctors, lawyers, people who are influential in the community. Wow. I mean, people that you would see at your church. And that was what made it such a trap, is that these people had such an image in the community that if you ever did try to speak out, you were totally dismissed offhand as saying, how could they ever do that?
because their image was so untarnished.
Because in your case, you did tell.
I did tell, and it didn't make any difference. In fact, what happened was I got 3 broken ribs because when I told people, it got back to the people who were actually trafficking me and abusing me, and they taught me a lesson not to tell again.
Gosh, this happened to you right here in Florida.
It did.
And it's not only cities, metropolitan areas, there's also rural areas where child trafficking is going on.
Yes, rural areas are another area where people are, are really finding out that it occurs quite frequently. It's all over. It's right in front of our eyes, but we just aren't trained to recognize it.
Wow. The biggest piece of advice you have for people who may suspect or who want to stop this from happening?
The biggest piece of advice I would have is to go to the Trafficking in America Task Force website and read the information there, the Polaris Project website, but call local law enforcement. There's a national trafficking hotline you can also call and report suspected abuse or trafficking, but speak out. Even if a lot of people will hesitate to call because they're not sure. But even if you're not sure, please call, because you could save a child's life.
How long were you trafficked?
7 years.
7 years. And
Yeah.
how did you finally get out of it and get out of it alive?
Well, there was a point when I was going through all of this that how people are kept in trafficking is not by chains of any metal known to man, it's by fear. And so this fear is held over you constantly. So one of the points of fear that was held over me was my life. And so what I actually did was, after I had gone through speaking out and not getting any response, I basically took my own life by taking a bottle of sleeping pills and a bottle of vodka and swallowing it. And so I was then rushed to the emergency room. And through that whole episode, I got enough red flags raised that I was able to distance myself. Plus, in terms of the people who were abusing and trafficking me, I became a risk for them because I came up on people's radar at that point. And that's what it took for me to come up and have people notice.
Wow. And now you spend your time writing about what you went through, what you endured. What kind of response have you gotten?
Phenomenal. I write for Communities Digital News, and I've also written for the Washington Times Communities. And when I first began writing and telling my story, I just felt I had to speak out. But I've had so many people just contact me and say, you know what? You just told my story. The same thing happened to me. And I haven't told anyone for my entire life that I went through this because I was so ashamed and so much in fear. So I am just gratified by every person that contacts me and really trusts me to confide in what happened to them as young children.
During your childhood, you were also forced into child pornography.
I was, and that tends to be a part of the trafficking and abuse phenomenon with pedophiles. I mean, child pornography is a real large industry for pedophiles and the trafficking industry, and so it's more or less part of that whole business plan, I guess I would say, that these people engage in. So.
Gosh, Jerome, thank you so much for coming here, sharing your story, writing about it, speaking about it. I know it must not be easy, but we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate it.
All right. And we have a list of resources for victims and those who suspect child abuse or trafficking posted at firstcoastnews.com. And if you suspect that a child is being abused, state law in Florida requires you to report it to the Florida Abuse Hotline. And throughout this program, we'll be posting that number to call. When we come back, the co-founder and president of Trafficking in America Task Force will join us.
So just like Jaden's story, we have another video here that is from a man who had survived sex trafficking as a child. And the reason why we put this in is because we need to understand that this crime isn't something that just affects females or
It's important to know the risk factors. Some of the risk factors include societal, such as lack of awareness of commercial sex exploitation and trafficking, sexualized children, lack of resources, and also lack of community support. Community risk factors. This can be peer pressure, could also be social norms, social isolation, gang involvement, under-resourced schools and neighborhoods, and communities. Relationship risk factors include family conflict, disruption, or dysfunction. And individual risk factors include a history of child abuse, neglect, or maltreatment, homelessness, runaway, LGBTQ, and a history of being systems involved, such as the juvenile justice, criminal justice, or foster care, as well as stigma and discrimination.
So, as mentioned before, one of the risk factors when it comes to children who are who become victims to human trafficking or sex trafficking is prior sexual abuse history. The following video gives you a little idea of what girls are experiencing when they're being sexually abused, and how they are devalued and dehumanized, and typically at a younger age when the abuse begins. So the following video will show you different statements that were told to these women and to these girls.
So according to the Girls Education and Mentoring Services, also known as GEMS, there is a continuum of abuse of C.S.E.C. So child abuse, such as linking of love, sex, and abuse, violation of boundaries, guilt and shame. A lot of these victims view themselves as sex objects. A lot of the victims have low self-esteem or feel unworthy. Many of them, as mentioned prior, are runaway, homeless, are in poverty or need. There's also unequal power dynamics of adult-child relationship. There can also be media influence, and let's talk about this for a little bit. If we look at a lot of commercials on TV, music videos, rap videos, we see that women are continually sexualized, and this can also be glamorized, so it can be intriguing to young women. Also, as mentioned in the video, when we first started this training, there's a demand. It's a billion-dollar sex industry, and women and victims in C.S.E.C. can be used over and over and over. And also being approached by recruiters, pimps, traffickers. As we mentioned, a lot of them know these young women have vulnerabilities, and they tell them what they want to hear, and oftentimes use intimidation and threat to lure them in. So those are the effects of being a victim. A lot of our victims have high rates of PTSD, the Stockholm Syndrome. They can also experience memory loss, which also is tied into the trauma. So a lot of the times, because of trauma, our brain is trying to protect us. So there's a possibility that we may experience memory loss, aggression, fear, depression, hostility, anxiety, more anger issues, sexually transmitted diseases or infections, physical trauma from beatings, emotional and psychological trauma, and also unwanted pregnancies. Psychological and behavioral clues. Being able to recognize the psychological and emotional consequences of human trafficking can also be helpful in identifying victims, because victims often develop general feelings of helplessness, shame, guilt, self-blame, and humiliation. They also suffer from shock and denial or display symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, phobias, panic attacks, anxiety, and depression. They suffer from sleep or eating disorders. They become addicted to drugs and or alcohol as a way to cope with or escape their situation, or as a method of control used by their traffickers. Become emotionally numb, detached, and deassociated from the physical and the psychological trauma, and display flat affect. Or they experience trauma bonding with the trafficker, positively identifying with the trafficker, and believe that despite repeated abuse, the trafficker is in love and is a loving boyfriend, spouse, or parent. Physical effects of human trafficking. While not all victims of trafficking have physical indicators that aid identification, many victims suffer serious health issues, some of which may include the following. Signs of physical abuse, such as bruises, broken bones, burns, and scarring. Chronic back, visual, or hearing problems from work in agriculture, construction, or manufacturing. Skin or respiratory problems caused by exposure to agriculture or other chemicals. Infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and hepatitis, which are spread in overcrowded, unsanitary environments with limited ventilation. Untreated chronic illnesses such as diabetes or cardiovascular disease, or reproductive health problems including sexually transmitted diseases, urinary tract infections, pelvic pain, and injuries from sexual assault or forced abortions.
Just keep pushing. I'm don't talk to strangers, you know? And he was like, okay, and drives off. And I don't know, something just gave me a weird feeling. I turned around, he coming back around the corner, and he's hop out the car with a gun, like, get in the car, get in the car.
I didn't know what he was about or nothing. He just seen me crying and, oh, you don't have nowhere to go. You want to come with me?
He was like, you want to make some money? And I didn't know what he was talking about. And I'm like, yeah.
He knew my age because I didn't lie about it. Like, oh no, it's okay, baby. I'll show you the ropes. It's okay.
I'm still a virgin at this time. Like, I was forced to go, you know?
I ended up getting raped by some John.
It's easier for them to rape a child if they can just pick them up off the street like that, you know?
Modern-day slavery is alive and real in the United States. Young girls are being bought and sold for sex in large numbers. Yet instead of being seen as victims, they are treated as criminals, charged as child prostitutes while their buyers often go free. It's time for that to end.
323 to 584.
They're put into handcuffs. They're put into the police car. They're brought to a detention center. They are brought before a judge, and they are convicted for prostitution.
Every time I got arrested, it wasn't like, are you safe at home? Like, did anything happen? Or, you know, is somebody holding you against your will? It's, oh, you're out here prostituting, you're going to jail right now. I don't want to hear anything else. Shut your mouth, let's go.
And I remember one of the staff was like, you know, why do you guys do what you do? Why don't you just get a job in front of everybody? You know, like with no sensitivity that this girl might be being forced or I might be hungry.
When a woman is beaten, it's called domestic abuse. When a woman is sexually abused, it's called rape. But when a child is raped, kidnapped, and sold for sex, she is locked up.
It was really hard to be, you know, seen as the criminal. I mean, I was a child.
I wasn't exploited until I was 14.
From 9 to 15.
They say the average age is 12 to 14, and that's a really low number. But I know girls who have been trafficked at 8, 9, and myself at 10.
What we know is that buyers seek out underage girls, that buyers are willing to pay more money for the underage girl, that there is a language that buyers use to be able to signal to the trafficker that they want a younger girl, new to town, fresh, or giving the measurements of the girl in the ad.
All across the country, American children are at risk of being victims of human trafficking. Girls are kidnapped or lured by traffickers at bus shelters, outside schools, or through social media. In big cities, rural areas, at truck stops on the interstate, many of them are beaten into submission.
I was sold in strip clubs. I was sold in massage parlors. He didn't care what it was as long as I made his quota. And if I didn't make his quota, I was beat, bruised, broken, tortured.
I've seen girls with their pimps' names on their foreheads or like on their neck or something like that, and it's like basically just telling other people that you belong to someone.
These girls are tattooed. They are literally branded like property.
He held her down and carved his name with a knife inside of her. And she was supposed to go get the real tattoo. She said no, so he tied her, like literally pushed her down and carved it into her.
They're branding these women, these girls, because they want to enslave them for life. And the biggest problem is we allow it. We see it and we look the other way.
How is it that we allow this to happen? How is it that we take a child who's been subject to this kind of sexual violence and put her in a jail cell?
I think it says that I wasn't worth saving. I think it says that I didn't deserve safety.
It just makes me feel like nobody believes you and everything you do is just so wrong. I just feel like I felt helpless.
We need to understand when we criminalize someone who's truly a victim, we're on the wrong side of the fence.
At the same time that the girls are locked up behind bars, their buyers are most often free to go. In any other situation, the assailant would be punished and charged with a felony.
Why am I going to jail? Why he isn't going to jail? You know, I didn't want to do this with him, but I have to for A, B, and C, and you're going to take me to jail?
There should be no difference between raping a child and paying to rape a child.
There are no Johns. There are child rapists and there are pedophiles.
When we let buyers off the hook, we are saying that we support rape.
It sends the message that it's okay for people to pay to rape children.
What we want to see is that buyers, because they are buying children for sex, are arrested and charged with statutory rape, sexual assault of a minor, or child endangerment.
Our mission is to transform existing scars, tattoos, and burns to help people who have been marked as property, directly or indirectly. Having these tattoos transformed, faded, or removed is the ultimate passage.
Transforming physical reminders is only part of the solution. Rights for Girls is dedicated to transforming how victims of human trafficking are perceived. When we transform our language, we can transform our laws. We can help survivors transform their lives.
We tracked how many times major media outlets use the term child prostitute or juvenile prostitute.
Child prostitute.
Child prostitute.
Child prostitute. Child prostitute. Child prostitution.
And in the last 5 years, that term or similar terms have been used 5,000 times.
Underage prostitution. Child prostitution.
Child prostitution. A crackdown on underage prostitution.
Child prostitute.
Booked for child prostitution.
I think the media has an ultimate responsibility. I think the media either makes or breaks labels.
How we are named is how we are treated. And so when the media talks about the girls as child prostitutes, that reinforces the idea that the girls are not victims.
I was a victim.
A victim.
A victim of child sex trafficking.
Child prostitution.
Child rape.
Underage prostitution.
Child rape.
Taken to jail and booked for child prostitution.
No child.
No child.
No child should be arrested for prostitution.
Child prostitution.
Child sex trafficking.
Underage prostitution.
Child sex trafficking.
Child prostitute. There is no such thing.
No such thing.
No such thing as a child prostitute.
It's time to change the law and to change our language.
Labels, visible and verbal, leave lasting marks. We have the power to transform them. Join the campaign and sign the petition to demand the Associated Press and all other media outlets stop using the term child prostitute. Together, we can protect our nation's girls.
So the following video is titled No Such Thing as a Child Prostitute. The video itself kind of gives you an idea of how our society has taken a very negative approach on dealing with kids that are being trafficked or the kids that are in the sex industry. Historically, these children were treated as criminals rather than children that were being manipulated or children that are being abused. Since this video has been made, there have been great strides in how we approach this issue. Many communities now are becoming more aware of how these children are actually victims or survivors as opposed to criminals. And so there's a lot of different things that have come into play to address this issue. There have been laws that have been enacted to try to account for kids that are being sex trafficked. There is also new child welfare laws. There is a new form of what we would call as child abuse or child abuse or something that a child can fall under the care of child welfare that now includes exploitation. So because there have been advocates for this, there have been changes. But if you look at this video, you'll see how society had consistently blamed the victim and buyers were easily able to get off. So please take a look and kind of look out for those signs of how society felt about children that were being prostituted.
Let's look at the language that is being used and why this is important. So, reframes the issue as child abuse. This also expresses the philosophy that sexually exploited children deserve support services instead of jail sentences. More accurately represents the scope of the issue and reality of exploited youth experiences. So we can take it from pimp to exploiter or trafficker, John or trick to buyer, child rapist, prostitution to being exploited, exploitation, prostitute to young experienced commercial sexual exploitation, victim to survivor.
So along with language sensitivity, there are some terms that you should know when it comes to C.S.E.C. And the reason for this is because if you hear any of these terms in the home with one of your youth, or if you hear any of these terms with any youth that you know, it's a high likelihood that they may be involved in some type of trafficking. So let's just go over the terms. For example, the game, the life, if you hear that, that's referring to the commercial sexual exploitation or the sex industry itself. The track, stroll, or blade, an area of town known for prostitution activity. Typically here in Fresno, the track is also referred to as, I believe it's like Hotel Drive, tends to be one of the very popular ones. The circuit, it's a series of cities among which prostituted people are moved. So if we think about where we live in Fresno, and Fresno is right off the 99. So any of our kids that may be victims of sex trafficking can easily be taken to San Francisco, to LA, to Las Vegas, to Bakersfield, anywhere that this 99 can take us. So you'll see that they quite often may establish circuits and rotate the girls among those major cities. Dates, Johns, and tricks are buyers of commercial sex. So anybody who's purchasing these children or purchasing these women are considered dates, Johns, or tricks. However, though, like we said previously, we would like to start using the language of exploiter. Daddy, the term is it's for a pimp who will often require his victim to call him. Quota is a set amount of money that a trafficking victim must make each night before she can come home. So it's meeting their quota every night prior to them to being able to come home. Turnout is to be forced into prostitution.
So some of the signs and red flags of human trafficking would be they're under control of another person, very similar to things like domestic violence or something like that. But somebody's controlling their actions, somebody's controlling their money, and their ability to even have friends.
The difficulty in identifying and rescuing victims from a law enforcement perspective is for an officer or a detective to gain the trust of these victims. They have been trained and forced and coerced to lead a life of a false identity and to run from the police. So the hardest thing is to get them to trust us.
So the challenges that we have in identifying victims of human trafficking are really twofold. And the first one would be the inability or the lack of self-identification of victims of trafficking. They don't understand or realize that what's happening to them is a crime.
I knew something was wrong, and that's why I started really searching for help. And I didn't really knew the term human trafficking.
The second part of our challenge in identifying victims of human trafficking is that it's a hidden crime. Traffickers don't want their victims of trafficking exposed to the public eye.
Traffickers keep these victims under a cloak of secrecy. They are to get what they want out of them. They have to hide them in the back rooms.
Some of the myths I hear is when I started speaking, a lot of people was like, human trafficking here, Fresno, Clovis, really? They're like, we automatically think China or Africa or those places where they're prostituting and they're selling people for sex.
Most of the victims of human trafficking that we've identified and provide services to are actually U.S. citizens.
Human trafficking is not just sex. It's people behind doors serving and babysitting.
The second myth that we deal with is that it's strictly prostitution, and nothing could be farther from the truth than that. It involves labor, it involves the exploitation of children, true, but it also involves what we don't see and what's even harder to see, those people that are being kept inside the homes, kept inside the businesses, and don't enjoy the freedoms that you and I do.
So to address the crime of human trafficking, it takes all of us. It takes a collaborative approach, including general public. Those of us that are professionals that work in anti-trafficking rely on the general public to provide us with tips, things that they see during their daily routines and their daily travels. And then we, as service providers or even law enforcement, come together to look to see if there's something happening. Law enforcement obviously is looking for a crime, and us as service providers and advocates, we're looking for the victim so that we can provide assistance to the victim.
And that's where the partners with law enforcement come into effect. We are able and fortunate through the relationships we have with EOC and the Sanctuary and the Central Valley Against Human Trafficking, able to offer the temporary housing, the counseling, and the medical issues that these victims need.
Well, for me, the message I would like for our victim to hear is don't give up, because I didn't. No matter who didn't listen to me, no matter who turned me down, I didn't give up. I still kept fighting. And guess what? Now I'm standing here being able to deliver this message and telling you that there are people out there that cares and they're ready to help you. All you got to do is just speak up. I graduated and got my GED, which is awesome because now I'm getting ready to go to city and register. And my most exciting thing is to see my kids happy and they don't have anything to be scared or worried about.
The best way to conduct a referral for potential victim of human trafficking or an identified victim of human trafficking would actually be to call the national hotline, which is 888-373-7888. And in that way, that national hotline can do the very quick assessment and be able to connect the victim with supportive services wherever that victim is in the entire United States. So they're the clearinghouse for the entire country as far as supportive services for victims of human trafficking.
At this time, we're going to go ahead and watch a video from EOC Central Valley Against Human Trafficking.
So as foster parents, it's important to know what warning signs to look out for. Some warning signs that an individual is being trafficked could be signs of physical abuse, such as burns, marks, bruises, or cuts. Quite often, these may be hidden, or they may be in areas of the body. Typically, traffickers will not necessarily inflict injuries onto a face because that's the product that they're selling. So often they will try to make these injuries appear as sex injuries. So sometimes traffickers will cause injuries like on the buttocks or somewhere around the breast, something that made it look like as though it was part of a sexual encounter, so that it maintains the fantasy that these buyers have, that these buyers are trying to have. Unexplained absences from school, truancy. So a lot of kids may still go to school even when they're being trafficked. But if you notice that they're missing a lot of school, that could be a sign. Less appropriately dressed than before. So obviously sex sells. That's what we learn in society. So traffickers dress these children in provocative clothing. They buy them sexy clothes so that they can sell their bodies. So if you notice that a kid who normally would wear a t-shirt and jeans and some Vans or some Converse, and all of a sudden now they're wearing heels, they're wearing tight jeans, they're wearing low-cut shirts, they're being more sexualized, or they're wearing short dresses, this could be a possible sign of sex trafficking. Sexualized behavior. If you're noticing that they're talking more and more about sexual behavior or sexual acts than they did before, or if they're acting these out more often. Overly tired or falls asleep in class. Like I said, sometimes they will still continue to attend school, but they may be working at night. So you can definitely see that they're losing sleep and they're not capable of paying attention in class. That could be a big sign. Withdrawn, depressed, or distracted. They brag about making or having lots of money. A lot of times these kids may feel proud that they're making a lot of money. However, they're not necessarily getting that money to be able to flash it around because all that money is being given to the trafficker. Display expensive clothes, accessories, or shoes. Now, once again, like I said earlier, this person, their body is, they're intending to sell it. So the trafficker will quite often get their nails done, give them expensive clothes because they want them to appear desirable. New tattoos, like I said earlier, branding, that a tattoo could be a brand, especially if it's a name, a crown, a cherry blossom, a barcode, something that you see that isn't necessarily a tattoo that a teenager would normally get. Having an older boyfriend or new friends with different lifestyle or gang involvement. Here in Fresno, the gang that's quite involved with the trafficking is the Dog Pound, and it's over there on the west side. The main heads of that group are actually now located in Madera, and I believe the reason why they moved there was just because they were getting a lot of there was a lot of attention on them from local authorities. However, like I said, if you see that this child is being involved now with an older guy, could be in his 20s, could be in his 30s, or if you see that they're quite often involved with gangs, there could be a chance that they may be trafficked as well. Disjointed family connections, running away, living with friends, or experiencing homelessness. How many of our youth in foster care run away? A lot of our adolescents are constantly running away and going into the streets, and if they don't have a place to stay, they become much more susceptible to being influenced by a trafficker who's promising them a warm bed, food in their belly, and love. So when we think about our kids that are constantly running away, they could be running away back to their trafficker. So these are things that we need to look out for when it comes to our kids in care. Pimps, traffickers often exhibit the following behaviors or characteristics. So if you do notice that your kiddo has an older boyfriend or somebody that's coming around, be aware of these characteristics, because it could be a sign that they're a trafficker. If they're jealous, controlling, and violent, so if they're saying, oh, my boyfriend gets so jealous, he doesn't want me, hanging out with anybody, they try to isolate them, because the more isolated this child becomes, the easier it is for them to control them. Significantly older than female companions. They promise things that seem too good to be true. They encourage victims to engage in illegal activities to achieve their goals and dreams. They buy expensive gifts or own expensive items like nice cars, jewelry. They're vague about their profession. So when you ask, oh, what is it that you do? Oh, I hustle, or I just get, I get my money the way I need to. Those are the type of things that you want to look out for. Pushy or demanding about sex. Encourages or inappropriate sexual behavior, and makes the victim feel responsible for his or her financial stability. Very open about financial matters with the victims. So if you do notice at any point that a youth is showing any of these symptoms or warning signs of trafficking, you can contact any one of these agencies. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, National Human Trafficking Hotline would be the first one I would call. The National Runaway Safe Line or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. If it's a foster youth that's in your home that's exhibiting some of these symptoms, call the social worker. Have the social worker know that there's some red flags coming up, and you want to make sure that they do a full assessment on these children. Social workers are now understanding a lot more about C.S.E.C and how our kids in foster care are victims of this. Quite often they're where they're getting the kids from is from foster care. So they have special tools, they have special interviewing techniques that they can utilize to try to help our kids and to actually find out what's really going on. So just make sure to talk to your social worker if you ever feel that there's signs that your child might be involved in sex trafficking.
So now let's talk about initial engagement with youth or victims of sex trafficking. You want to build rapport. You want to talk about tangible needs, intangible needs, harm reductions, and do's and don'ts, which you do have a handout for that. So when you build a rapport, be patient and consistent. When you first meet a survivor, they may not want services or be ready to leave the life. It is unreasonable for us to expect youth to make life-changing choices on our timeline. Letting them know that you will be there regardless of what or when will help establish that you are a reliable adult they can trust. Give them credit. By the time they meet you, they have likely endured tremendous trauma, violence, and adversity. The fact that they have survived this can be a source of pride. So your report could be compromised if you treat them like victims who need to be rescued. Respect their decisions and perspectives, even when you may not agree or understand. Utilize open-ended questions that encourage the processing of feelings, experiences, and choices. Help them explore their ambivalence instead of trying to persuade them towards a certain course of action. If they aren't ready to share with you, give them an opportunity to ask you questions. Celebrate even the smallest successes. You may be one of the few people in their life that recognizes their strengths and qualities. Look for opportunities to provide positive encouragement, even if it's just saying that you are glad they called. And be yourself. Youth know when you're faking, and it can impact your credibility. Do educate yourself about the dynamics and language of C.S.E.C. Don't misrepresent who you are and where you've been. And maintain appropriate boundaries. Make sure that relationship you are building is healthy for both of you. Survivors should not depend on you to meet all of their needs, and you should not feel solely responsible for their well-being. Work with other community partners to develop a network of support for the survivor and yourself. Here's meeting tangible needs: crisis housing, long-term housing, food, clothing, education, job or income, viable alternatives for employment, transportation, opportunities for development, and spiritual care. The mindset of a trafficking victim. A human trafficking victim may develop a mindset of fear, distrust, denial, and conflicting loyalties. Foreign victims of trafficking are often fearful of being deported or jailed, and therefore they may distrust authority figures, especially law enforcement and government officials. Likewise, traffickers may convince sex trafficking victims who are U.S. citizens or LPRs that if they report their traffickers to the police will jail the victim for prostitution, while the trafficker, pimps, or johns will go free. Many victims of both sex and labor trafficking fear that if they escape their servitude and initiate investigations against their trafficker, the trafficker and his or her associates will harm the victim's family members, or others. Trauma bond. The term trauma bond is also known as a Stockholm syndrome. It describes a deep bond which forms between a victim and their abuser. This can happen between victims and they can victimize each other. Peer recruitment. I believe there was a case in Hanford, California, where a 16-year-old young girl was sex trafficking. So what she was doing is recruiting her friends and other people that she knew in the area to be involved in sex trafficking. So this is a form of peer recruitment. Also, victims of abuse often develop a strong sense of loyalty towards their abuser, despite the fact that the bond is damaging to them. Conditions necessary for trauma bonding include to be threatened with and to believe that there is real danger, harsh treatment interposed with very small kindness, isolation from other people or perspectives, a belief that there is no escape. The symptoms of trauma bonding can manifest negative feelings for potential rescuers, support of abusers' reasons and behaviors, and inability to engage in behaviors that will assist release detachment from abusers. So now we're going to look at the application of the stages of change model for commercially sexualized exploited youth and their families. As you can see on the graph, there's a pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And there's also the recycling. Pre-contemplation stage, pretty much the victim has no awareness of need to change. There's denial, difficulty to reach, does not want help, and can appear to be defensive. The contemplation stage becomes aware of the client or the victim will become aware of the need to change, but has not made the commitment to change. They begin to weigh out the pros and cons of maintaining the current behavior and the new behavior, and they can remain here for a long time without taking any action. The preparation stage, this is where the victim has made a commitment to change the old behavior and continues to increase the commitment to change. She or he begins to create a change plan. They become open to resources. They attend regular services, and most often, they stage most often skipped over. This is actually the stage that a lot of people skip over. Then when we look at the action stage, this is implementation of the change plan. They're actually putting it to work. The focus starts to become more behavioral. It tends to be open to support from others. And as triggers are identified, they create a relapse prevention plan. In the maintenance stage, integration of change into new life. Victims' intensity of triggers isn't as high. They sustain behavior change is still a work. They stay out of the life, may maintain job or school, and a stable living environment. The recycling stage is where revictimization versus lapse versus relapse. They'll run away from the program, establishes contact with the exploited, returns to old scenery, and it's expected. Revictimization is also part of the relapse.
Stages of Change is a model that was formulated to help those who were struggling with alcohol abuse and drug abuse to make healthier choices. And it's a collaborative, non-judgmental, and multi-process approach. And it was tailored to help the commercially sexually exploited youth population. Pre-contemplation is where the individual doesn't see a problem with the situation that they're in. The next stage is contemplation, and that's where a lot of the work that we do is important, planting the seeds for just starting to think about leaving, starting to think about what would that look like. Preparation, and that's where individual is getting ready to take actions. The client is taking small steps. Next is action, and that's where the big changes are happening. The client has maybe moved out, decided that they need to be in a better place, that decided that they need to be in school, applied to a job and gotten that job. And then comes maintenance, and that's when those positive behaviors are continuing and they're steady. And then there's relapse, which we do see, and just like for alcoholism or drug abuse, it is a part of the process of healing. Stages of Change model is currently best practice in working with C.S.E.C because it involves the individuals in their own process, in their own healing process. It also validates where they are, and it really plays on their strengths and pulls from their strengths.
So again, the pre-contemplation stage looks like, again, they're not ready to talk about this. They'll even defend the exploiter or pimp, and they don't want any help. You'll probably hear statements like, I love my daddy, he takes care of me. I'm happy making money. I'm good with the way things are. I'm making money doing what other people give away for free. It's like justifying that behavior. So what can you do in this stage? Just validate their experience, encourage self-exploration, not action. And you can use statements such as, I can understand why you feel that way. How do you feel when? Is there anything about your relation with him that you don't like? And I'm proud of you. Again, at the contemplation stage, this often is an external event. They're not ready to talk about this. They'll even defend
assault, pregnancy, STDs,
the exploiter or pimp. fear
and they don't want
consequences
any
of
help.
leaving the life, violence,
You'll
retribution,
probably
threats
hear
to
statements like,
self
"I
and
love my
family,
daddy,
being
he takes
homeless,
care of
or
me.
having no money.
I'm happy making
Think
money.
about leaving,
I'm good with
but
the things
but feeling
the way
they're
things are.
isolated.
I'm making money
Use
doing
statements like,
what other
I
people
don't
give
think it
away
was
for
going
free.
to turn out this way.
It's
This
like
is what I'm good
justifying
at.
that
I'm not good at
behavior.
anything else.
So what can you do
What
in
you
the
can
stage?
do here is
Just
listen
validate
and
their
allow them
experience,
to tell you their story without being
encourage
judgmental.
self-exploration, not
Encourage
action.
him or her to make a list
And you can
of
use
pros
statements
and cons.
such as, "I can understand
Validate
why you
his
feel
or
that
her
way.
ability to change.
How do you feel when?
Identify his
Is there
or her
anything about your
ability,
relation with
to
him that
change
you don't like?
and identify
And I'm
what
proud of you.
obstacles may be in place and help them come up with solutions.
So again, the
Identify
pre-contemplation
sources
stage
support,
looks like,
including self.
again, they're not ready to talk
Use
about
statements
this.
such as,
They'll even
when are
defend
times you feel really good,
the exploiter
really
or
bad.
pimp.
I think
And
you
they
should
don't
be
want
proud
any
of
help.
yourself for.
You'll probably hear statements like, "I love my daddy, he takes care of me. I'm happy making money. I'm good with the way things are. I'm making money doing what other people give away for free." It's like justifying that behavior. So what can you do in this stage? Just validate their experience, encourage self-exploration, not action. And you can use statements such as, "I can understand why you feel that way. How do you feel when? Is there anything about your relation with him that you don't like? And I'm proud of you." So again, the pre-contemplation stage looks like, again, they're not ready to talk about this. They'll even defend the exploiter or pimp. And they don't want any help. You'll probably hear statements like, "I love my daddy, he takes care of me. I'm happy making money. I'm good with the way things are. I'm making money doing what other people give away for free." It's like justifying that behavior. So what can you do in this stage? Just validate their experience, encourage self-exploration, not action. And you can use statements such as, "I can understand why you feel that way. How do you feel when? Is there anything about your relation with him that you don't like? And I'm proud of you." So again, the pre-contemplation stage looks like, again, they're not ready to talk about this. They'll even defend the exploiter or pimp. And they don't
Remember
want
that
any help.
action is they're staying
You'll
in foster
probably
care,
hear
no
statements
longer
like,
living in
"I
the
love
streets.
my daddy, he takes care
They
of me.
cut off contact with the
I'm happy
exploiter
making
and our
money.
buyers.
I'm good with the things
They'll move from
the
the
way
area of
things are.
exploitation.
I'm making money
They
doing
use statements as,
what other people
it's
give
so
away
hard
for
and
free.
it's taking so long to get
It's like
everything
justifying
together.
that
I'm so glad I
behavior.
left. I hate him.
So what can
but
you
I
do in
miss
this
him.
stage?
This
Just
is what
validate their
you
experience,
can do.
encourage self-exploration,
Support
not action.
and validate efforts.
And you
it
can
takes
use
to lead.
statements such as, "I
Address
can understand why
safety
you feel that
concerns.
way.
Discuss
How do you feel
self-care,
when?
such as it's
Is
completely
there anything
normal
about
to
your
love and
relation
hate
with
your
him
ex
that
at
you
the
don't
same
like?
time.
And I'm
Let's talk
proud of
about
you.
your feelings before you act on them. And I'm proud of you.
So again,
You're
the
taking big steps right now.
pre-contemplation
Be proud of
stage looks
yourself.
like, again, they're not ready to talk about this. They'll even defend the exploiter or pimp. And they don't want any help. You'll probably hear statements like, "I love my daddy, he takes care of me. I'm happy making money. I'm good with the way things are. I'm making money doing what other people give away for free." It's like justifying that behavior. So what can you do in this stage? Just validate their experience, encourage self-exploration, not action. And you can use statements such as, "I can understand why you feel that way. How do you feel when? Is there anything about your relation with him that you don't like? And I'm proud of you." So again, the pre-contemplation stage looks like, again, they're not ready to talk about this. They'll even defend the exploiter or pimp. And they don't want any help. You'll probably hear statements like, "I love my daddy, he takes care of me. I'm happy making money."
So that's
I'm
a
good with
relapse
things
stage. Again, let's
the way
revisit.
things are.
This is where the
I'm
teen
making
might run
money
away.
doing
They might
what other people
reestablish
give
and
away
connect
for
with
free.
the exploiter
It's like
or
justifying that
the
behavior.
Johns. They
So what
return
can
to
you
the
do in
club
this
or the
stage?
agency.
Just validate their
They
experience.
begin to see the buyers regularly.
Encourage self-exploration,
And they use
not
statements
action.
as, "He really loves me," or "I'm
And you
always
can
going
use
to be like
statements
this.
such
This
as,
is just
"I
the
can
way I am."
understand why you feel that way.
Statements
How do
and
you
what you
feel
can do
when?
is address
Is there
the
anything
feelings
about
of
your
failure.
relation with
We
him
assure
that
them
you
that
don't
most
like?
people
And I'm proud
relapse,
of you.
evaluate triggers, and plan stronger coping skills.
So again, the
and you can use statements such
pre-contemplation
as, "It's
stage
okay,
looks like,
it's normal to
again,
struggle
they're not ready to talk
with
about
making
this.
really big changes.
They'll even
You're still
defend
welcome here, and I'm
the
still
exploiter
here to
pimp.
support you.
And they
I
don't want
believe in
any
you.
help. You'll probably hear statements
In addition
like, I
to
love my
these
daddy, he
high-risk
takes care of me.
indicators, there are more subtle
I'm
signs
happy
of
making money.
child sex
I'm
trafficking,
good with
including
things
increased submissive
the
behavior,
way things are.
STDs,
I'm making money doing
especially in
what
children
other
who are
people
younger
give
than
away for
14, and
free.
new tattoos or scars.
It's like justifying
young
that
people
behavior. So what can you
is
do in the
hesitant to
stage?
explain, among
Validate
many
their
other
experience,
signs.
encourage
It's important that you understand that
self-exploration,
young
not
people may
action.
not tell you about the abuse
And you can
or
use
consider
statements such
themselves
as,
victims.
I can understand why you
According
feel
to
that
the
way.
National Center for
How do you feel
Missing
when?
and Exploited Children,
Is there anything
children and
about your
teens who
relation
have
with
been
him that
sexually
you don't like?
exploited may be
And
too
I'm proud
afraid
of
or
you.
ashamed to tell an adult. They might feel
So
the
again, the
trusted adult won't believe them, or
pre-contemplation
they may
stage
not
looks
feel
like,
that they were
again,
a
they're
victim.
not ready to talk about
Much
this.
like other forms
They'll
of
even
abuse,
defend
it can take
the
time for
exploiter
a child
pimp.
or a teen to be
And
ready
they don't
to
want any
disclose
help.
their victimization,
You'll
even
probably
if
hear
they are
statements
living in a
like,
safe
I love
home
my
with
daddy, he
supportive
takes care of
foster
me.
or kinship family.
I'm happy making money. I'm good
Know
with
the
things
signs.
the way
It's
things are.
important to find
I'm making money
training
doing
like these,
what other people give
to
away
develop
for free.
your relationship and understanding,
justifying that
and
behavior.
to support
So what can you do
healthy
in the stage?
relationships with children who
Validate
have
their
been
experience,
victims of sex
encourage
trafficking and human
self-exploration, not action.
It's also good to contact
And you
your
can
child
use statements such as,
agency or
I can
county and ask
understand
them
why you
what
feel that
training
way.
resources are available.
How do you feel when?
If you think
Is there
you have
anything
come
about
in
your
contact
relation
with
with
a
him
victim
that
of
you don't
human
like?
trafficking,
And
call
I'm
the
proud of
National
you.
Human Trafficking Resource Center at 1-800-1888.
So again, the pre-contemplation stage looks like, again, they're not ready to talk about this.
The National
They'll
Human
even
Trafficking
defend
Resource Center can help
the
you
exploiter
identify and
pimp.
coordinate with local
And they don't want any
organizations
help.
that protect and serve trafficking
You'll
victims.
probably hear statements like,
For
I
more
love my daddy,
information,
he takes
visit
care
the
of me.
Human Trafficking
I'm happy
website
making
at
money. I'm good with things the way things are. I'm making money doing what other people give away for free.
There's
It's like
also
justifying that
additional
behavior.
resources and information
So what can you do in the
on
stage?
the following slide.
Validate their experience, encourage self-exploration,
Human
not
trafficking
action.
resources.
This
And
center
you
will
can
help
use
you
statements
determine
such
if you
as,
have
I can
encountered a
understand why you
victim
feel
of
that
human
way.
trafficking.
Identify
feel
local
when?
resources available.
Is there
in your
anything
community
about
to
your
help
relation
victims,
with him that you
and
don't
coordinate
like?
with local
And I'm
services
proud of you.
and social services providers to help
So
protect
again, the
and serve victims so they
pre-contemplation
can begin the
stage looks
process
like,
of rehabilitation.
again, they're not ready to
and
talk about
restoring
this.
their lives.
They'll even
When
defend
appropriate, the Resource Center
the
makes
exploiter
referrals to
pimp.
local organizations
And they
that
don't
can
want any
assist
help.
victims with counseling,
You'll
case management,
probably hear
legal
statements
advice,
like,
and
I love my
other
daddy, he
appropriate
takes care of me.
services.
I'm happy making
as
money.
well as to law
I'm good with
enforcement
things
agencies that help
the
track
way things are.
victims
I'm making
reach
money doing
safety.
what other people give away for free. It's like justifying
In closing,
that behavior.
the best thing that you can
So
do
what
is
can
be
you do in the
authentic
stage?
and approach
Validate
these
their
victims
experience, encourage
with genuine,
self-exploration,
unconditional,
not
positive
action.
regard.
And you can use
And really
statements
what
such
they
as,
need
I can
is
understand
to
why
know
you
that
feel
they
that
are
way.
not judged and that
How
they
do
are
you feel when?
supported.
Is there
and
anything about your
loved
relation
and
with him
welcomed
that you don't
regardless
like?
of their
And I'm
past
proud
or
of you.
current experiences? This slight approach
So again,
can
the
make the big difference.
pre-contemplation
If you have
stage
any
looks like,
questions, please don't
again,
hesitate
they're not ready to talk
contact
about
us
this.
at
They'll
BMS
even
Counseling
defend
Services.
the
Thank you very
exploiter
much.
pimp.